Hello, this is Dr. Paul Cottrell, and this is episode 13 of Graveyard Shift. So this episode is kind of a special episode. A lot has happened in the last week or so, but I want to put it in the context of a larger issue that's going on in the United States, especially in medical school and in the medical profession, but also at a personal level. Today is actually the anniversary of my brother's passing. Passed away in 2010 from a heart attack, and that whole process kind of led me into medicine. It took a little while to process it all. He died when I was just starting my PhD. And, obviously transitioning from, a finance career into medicine is daunting, and it takes a lot of time. But yeah, today was his anniversary of his death. So at this time in 2010, I was starting to make arrangements to fly back to Michigan and bury my brother. So, so this whole week is kind of, for me personally, every year from, let's say, July 4th all the way to July 13th, it's kind of a really weird set of days. July 4th is a happy, kind of celebration of the country, and I kind of remember what it was like when I was a kid, with the fireworks and everything in the neighborhood. But then, within that time span between the 4th and the 13th, near the middle is my birthday, and so I just turned 51, so that's kind of a happy thing. But then there's that sad part of it, on the 13th is when my brother passes away. So, that's always a bittersweet kind of set of days to go through. There's the ups and downs, there's the happy occasions, and then it ends with a sad note. But just recently, in the news, and I put a link in my Twitter feed. Children today, all right, because of the over-credentialing in America, the over-reliance of going into, more higher-paying professions, better schools, and all this, buying into the idea that if you do this, you become more successful. These kids are they're getting stressed out, at all different levels, and for different reasons. The link that I sent, and this kind of dovetails into what's going on in medicine and medical school specifically. But, let's do a bottom up here. So a lot of parents put their kids into private school because the public schools are not very good. They're failing, flat out failing. And they're definitely not preparing students for the top 40 schools in the country, especially not the top 10. I mean, is it possible for a public school student to get in? Yes, but, the odds are not in their favor. But it's possible, all right? So what happens is more affluent families put their kids into private schooling. There's different types of private schooling. There is, supplemental private schooling where the kids go to public school and get supplemental education, maybe on the weekend or, you know, at the end of the day or whatever, and that's private. Then there is they stay at home, but they live at home, but they go to private school. There's a lot of that going on in New York City. And then there's the more affluent ones where you board. It's a boarding school. All right, so the Twitter post that I made a couple days ago was dealing with a boarding school. It was an affluent boarding school, St. Paul and I forgot the other one. But well-known people went there. You know, the Kennedys and even John Kerry went there. All right, but what's happening is that children they're getting stressed out because they feel as though that if they're not perfect, if they don't have a 4.5, right, you know, they're not going to get into their school or become their choice, get into their choice of career. It's a big problem. It's a big problem. So there's a lot of stress that goes on with these kids. And unfortunately, because of that stress, because of the scheduling is very rigorous, the homework is, there's lots of homework. They're pushed to their limit academically, and kids need to be pushed, that's for sure. You don't want to be, but there's a limit. They need to be kids, but also, they need to enjoy the process, but they also need that resistance training to perform, right? But, over time, more and more people are, let's say, applying to Harvard or Yale, right? But the number of seats that are available is basically, it goes up a little bit, but it's basically static, relatively static compared to the number of applicants. So out of, about 1,900, or let's just round it up to 2,000 seats for the Harvard College, they're getting about 57 to 60,000 applicants, right? And it's been going up. So that means that their acceptance rates go down, even though the number of seats are relatively static because the number of people applying. So it's getting very competitive, and it stresses these kids out. And these kids, unfortunately, because they're started at a very young age to try to prep for these higher end schools. They maybe aren't performing as well as they want to, or they don't get into the school that they would hope for or whatever, and then they commit suicide. So there's this built-in stress that is happening with the school system in the United States. Especially if you want to be, at the top, the top 10 or whatever. So these kids are trying to, they're doing 2 different sports. They're trying to help with scholarship, because of their, maybe athletic acumen, and they have to obviously perform scholastically. So they're really pushing. So these kids they're not being kids anymore. Things are different than they were in the 70s or the 80s. Yes, there was competition, but it's far more. The bar to get into these places is much higher now than it was back 30 years ago, all right? So this added stress plus the cost of the private school is like $50,000 to $60,000 a year, right? And, depending on sometimes even more. But, depending on when you put the child into private school, if it's just for high school, that's 4 years. That's $200,000 That's $240,000 just in private education for high school, plus the supplemental stuff, right, for the child. So there's stress on the child from the parents, even if they're affluent. Well, they're investing in their child's education at such a high degree that they're demanding, a result. Well, that adds to the stress on the child. And then, what happens is that some of these children that come from affluence may be able to get into these private schools, but aren't performing as well. And what happens is that the parents have a tendency to be, especially if they're a legacy, have a tendency to be able to buy their kid in. Or, there was the scandals that were going on, relatively recently, the last couple of years or so, about test scores and assessment tests and, buying officers that bring in the children into the college, So there's a lot of corruption that's going on top of it. So people in the United States need to really have a discussion about the stress levels that we are putting on children these days. Suicides are going up, and people aren't paying attention to the stress that's happening. Now there's other tangential things that are going on. Children are having a tendency to have more ADHD, probably because of screen time on computers and digital devices and all this, right? So, but I'll tell you, they're just, the bar is just so high for them to get into college, especially in the top 40. Now, people would say, what's the big deal to get into, let's say, the top 50 or the top 200 or whatever? There isn't. You can be very successful going to a state school. There are probably more people that are successful in terms of absolute numbers that go to state colleges than Ivy League colleges, right? But the perception is that, to be successful, you have to go to the top 40. And that's not true. It's not true. You can be very successful and not. But the children's perception is that way. They feel as though they won't be successful. And then there's added pressure from the parents, this private schooling that is happening. And so I know of a case of a private school in New York recently where the child killed themselves, and they think that the reason for the suicide was because they didn't get into the college they wanted to through the early admission process. Some of these schools will admit the students 6 to a year in advance, 6 months to a year in advance through the advanced admissions process. Because the way this works with the private schools is that you put them in, and it's kind of a back door to the higher schools. So it's kind of like you have a better chance of at least seeing the student's application in front of an officer of admissions, right? So that's part of the reason why they can jack up the price for the tuition for these private schools, right? You get kind of special access, but there's no guarantee because this is the seats. But these students, if they don't get in, bam, they get all stressed out. Some of them, will lick their wounds and just go to a good school and be successful. But others, they spiral down into depression and stuff because their whole childhood life has been under the assumption that success is only if you get into such and such school or such and such discipline, such and such major or whatever, right? And that's a fallacy. But the point here is that they believe it. They believe this. And that's a big, big problem. So what does that mean for medical school, all right? Medical school back when I was younger, right? Back in, the early 90s, there wasn't STEP, right? STEP comes in at about 94, right? Step 1, 2, and 3. So anyone that got their MD degree before 94, they didn't have to go through the testing that a current medical student has to go through. All right. So on top of it just getting harder to get in because there's more people applying. Once you're in medical school, right? The testing is far more than it was 25, 30 years ago. All right. So there's this over-reliance on accreditation. There's an over-reliance on testing. There's an so there's this buildup of stress, right? It's hard to get into medical school. Believe me, it is so hard to get into medical school. It is so hard to get through medical school, right? Right? But these students that are there are good students, but the system is failing the students, just like on how the system is failing the high school students in private or public, where they're good, but it's the bar for entrance is just too damn high. It's just the carnage it causes is real. It's real and at times deadly. So, all right, so you spend all this time to get into a decent school, right? Do your undergrad, you try to do well on your MCAT, and you try to get into a good school, a medical school or a medical school, right? And you do that, Usually these students, these younger students, I'm the older type, but these younger students, their whole life has been studying for medical school. All of high school was just the study to get into college, to get in a pre-med program, to be able to perform well on an MCAT, to get into medical school, right? Then they're into medical school, and their whole mission is to do well in rotation to be able to get a good residency. Okay, so here's the problem. When you're young and you don't see the wisdom of different disciplines, or you don't realize that there's more to life than just your career or just your academic performance, you lose your bearing. You don't have an anchor, and they get lost. So we had a classmate recently that was in rotation, and all indications point to a suicide. And the reason why these things are happening is because there's so much pressure to do well on your shelf exams during rotation, the stress of managing the rotation, the stress of performing your physical duties during the rotation, the workup of the patient, the write-up of the action plan, the managing of the patients, dealing with the different levels of residents. There's like a first-year resident, second-year resident, third-year resident. Depends on the rotation you're in. But you got all these hoops to try to impress, right? And some people, may not jive with that particular resident or chief physician, right, for that particular rotation. Well, if it's something that you want, let's say if you want to be an OBGYN and you're in OBGYN rotation and you're not performing well, either on the shelf exams or whatever, it could be a make or break, right? For you to be able to get into OBGYN for the match for your residency. So, you're in rotation and you have to go through all these different rotations, but you have to get letters of recommendation and score well on your shelf exams and yada, 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 right? But if you don't do well, some of these people, because their whole life was focused on to be a medical doctor, right? Or, to be an OBGYN doctor or whatever, things happen and they don't do well and they freak out because their whole life was predicated on studying and performing and getting up to that point. Now, some people do well, some people change their mind and what they want, what type of MD they want, but what happened was, if someone doesn't know how to kind of balance studying and doing tasks within the rotation, they're not going to do so well. Some people can do very well if they focus on one task, one type of part of the job. But if you have to balance a bunch of different tasks within the rotation, some of these students don't do so well. Some do very well, and unfortunately, one of our classmates looks like that's what happened. He said he couldn't manage it, and it looks like he took his life. And so, this is the second death that I know of within during this whole process of being in medical school. The first death was actually a COVID-related rotation situation where during the first wave they caught COVID and died from it. But this is now I've had countless, probably 50 or 60 students that I know that contracted COVID, various degrees, all vaccinated, various degrees, some minor symptoms, others a little bit more problematic. A few, not many, but a few have kind of signs of long COVID. But they're alive. But it's just a shame to see a student that their whole life was wanting to be a doctor, young, and their whole existence was predicated on becoming a doctor, and then taking their life. It's just the system is failing people. He's smart, a little odd, some people are socially awkward. I do think that he had an issue with balancing tasks, between, two conflicting things. Usually living through life gives you that kind of skill set. Maybe what it is that doctors, people shouldn't get into medicine until they're older. Maybe it's just, physically, yeah, younger is better. You can memorize better than when you're older, that's for sure. You can memorize when you're younger better than when you're older, is my point. But, absorbing the information is probably a little easier when you're younger. But there's a wisdom when you're older to be able to go through the pain, because you've anchored yourself, either, with family or with a different career, or living life gives you that anchor, that there's more to it. There's more to life than just being a doctor, right? It's a noble pursuit, but it's not the end all of one's life. And unfortunately, these children, they think that it is the end all of their life if they don't get this. So unfortunately, unfortunately, we had a classmate that looks like, that he ended his life. We have scant details on what exactly happened. I knew him somewhat. I mean, I wasn't good friends with him, but, we talked during our medical sciences. He was a good scorer, he was, he performed well on the tests and stuff. So it was such a shock. But, I just you don't know, who's hurting, But here's the wacky thing about this. And I know people, they'll listen to this and they'll go, yeah, right. But, about 4 days before the announcement from the school to the classmates, right? The student body, I had this weird feeling, even though I was not close to him, I had this weird feeling to contact him to see how he was doing, right? But, because he was kind of not in my immediate circle of friends, he was tangential. He was one step removed. A good friend of mine knew him. He was a clinical partner. And so that's how I, sort of knew him, right? And once in a while we'd take walks or something, a group of us, and he showed up. He looked like he was trying to make friends, but there was a little bit of social awkwardness about him. But yeah, I just, what if I reached out, within those 4 days? Would I have prevented something from happening? Would I have said, oh, it's okay, maybe he would have said something that's bothering him, and I could have, gave him a different perspective, a more positive outlook, and, just steered him just slightly away from the path that he was going, and he would still be here. Kind of like an asteroid that's way out in space, right? And if you just nudge it a little bit, the impact won't happen. If I just talk to him just a little bit. But it's so weird that I had this feeling that I needed to reach out to him, even though he wasn't in my immediate circle. And unfortunately, I didn't. And this is the result. So I kind of feel bad. I know it's, I shouldn't feel that way too much, but there is a little sense of when you're in these kinds of situations, when you're in medical school, all your cohorts, even if you don't like them or not, some of them you like, some of them you don't. Some of them are very competitive and try to backstab you and all that stuff. But, the far majority are really nice, right? And we're all kind of like trench buddies going through the same, the same ordeal. The stress of the testing, the stress of going through clinic, the stress of just, managing this very, very, very hard process that gets harder each round of medical students. And that's the main theme that I was, bringing up here. This is that the system just keeps on piling on the testing and keeps on piling on the stress up to the point and increasing the cost of the education. And eventually people crack, for various reasons. But this is one of the end results of a system where it's not okay to just, well, that's how the other generation did it. No, that's not how the other generation did it, right? Like, for example, all right, and I'm not trying to create stir on the internet, right? But, Malone, for example, his education, right, as an MD, it was easier than ones that are going through MD school now. Or even going to, with Dr. Fleming, right? you know, he is if I remember right, I believe he received his MD before 94. So that was, you know, that was a different testing scheme. And so things are different now. It's harder. Now, what they had that we don't have is that there's regulation in how many hours that a resident can work, right? I think it was pretty much unlimited for most disciplines. I'm not sure if surgery still has that limit or not. Maybe it has the limit. I don't know. I don't know if they have an unlimited or an unlimited. But the you know, so that's something harder for them than what we have. It's a little bit easier. But I'll tell you, because of a litigious society, it's just the testing is out of control, and it gets to the point where it, you know, when you're talking about these students competing for the same rotation, or not the rotation, the same residency, it's a problem. It's a problem. There's too much stress. So the same issue that is happening with younger kids trying to get into the top schools for college, you know, the Harvard, the Yales, Brown, you know, or the Big Ten or whatever, right? These students, the same kind of stress is on these medical students trying to get into their competitive residency, right? And it's breaking people. It's breaking people. You know, sometimes, you know, in most cases, if it breaks them, you know, they'll drop out of medical school, or, you know, just they say that this just is not worth the stress and the pain. I mean, literally, there's an emotional pain to go through this. You have to have high pain tolerance to get through medical school. And, you know, some people just give up. You know, you've seen a lot of doctors, you know, they're already practicing. You know, so you have the ones that will give up because it's just too stressful in medical school. They'll get to, let's say they made it through and they're into residency. And because of the stress of residency, you know, they give up, right? There's many doctors, especially the ones that are doing the, you know, the vlogs on, you know, about the subject. There's many of them that are dropping out of residency. But even more so, which is even more concerning, is the doctors that are practicing because of the reimbursement rate, the stress of the admin, regulations, you know, compliance and all this stuff. They're checking out. They're getting out of the industry. So here we have a problem where we need more doctors, but yet the system is trying to prevent us from becoming doctors because they're making it too damn hard. And people are breaking, you know, and it's not easy. Well, so I would, you know, if I could wave a magic wand, you know, obviously I would, you know, have our classmate back, but, you know, the system needs to be fixed. You know, this is just the wrong way to teach students. This is the wrong way to treat future physicians, you know. And it gets so bad that, you know, you have these, sorry for the wind, but it gets so bad, you know, with the reimbursements and stuff, that you got these other MDs that decide, well, they're not going to practice. They're going to, you know, do research and get NIH grants and, you know, build a lab, or, you know, collect a big fee through their NIH grant, right? Or, you know, a lot of them try to associate themselves with some sort of big pharma project, right? HOTES is kind of like that. Yeah. Meanwhile, we have people that need care. We need more doctors, right? It's a problem. But, you know, then that's just the student body. That's just the student body breaking down in medical school. either quitting or killing themselves, right? Because of the pressure. Then there is the realization, right? That you're in an environment, in many cases, you're in an environment where people are seriously ill and they're dying. So that you have to cope with seeing a patient die, or cope with a patient committing suicide or whatever. So there's that added dimension. So you're seeing your classmates that potentially are, dying or committing suicide, dying in the sense that, an accident happens or they get ill and they die and you got to deal with it, right? And the suicide, or a suicide attempt. Then you have patients that, fall in that category where they're sick and they die from the illness, or, they have some sort of mental trauma and they commit suicide. So you as a physician are trying to deal with that, right? And then there's that added component where you have people in your family or your friends that are totally not in medical school, right? Passing away, such as, what recently happened to my mother, in early 2022. It's not easy for a student to deal with. It's not easy for a medical student to absorb it, because there's no time for grief. It's just, you just keep on pushing. You just keep on pushing, because there's another test to study for. There's another exam in pharmacology, or another exam in cardiology, or another exam in pathophysiology, right? You can't stop. There's no time to grieve. And I think the only types of people out there that have any understanding of what I'm saying are combat vets, where you're in a situation where you see one of your buddies getting blown up from the enemy, but you can't grieve. You got to just keep on fighting, because if you sit and think about the meaning of life, you end up dead on the battlefield. So it's something similar. It's different. Obviously, being in war is a lot scarier and a lot worse. A lot more stress and but it's similar. It's similar. There's a PTSD that happens. And so, a lot of people aren't talking about this, with medical school. How does the student physician, the physician in training, deal with death that's in their family and keep on pushing? How do they deal with the patient's death, that they're caring for, and you have to keep on pushing? And how do you deal with one of your classmates that commits suicide, or dies from a disease or an accident? You just got to keep on pushing. And then we have a population out there that's just like, they don't even, they're so anti-doctor, so anti-nurse, but yet to become a nurse and to become a doctor is so hard. And we see actually the human being in its most vulnerable situation. And we're trying to manage that to the best of our trade. Right? Right? But you got a lot of people out there that don't understand that. Don't understand the level of training that people have to go through, the level of hoops, and the emotional cost that it has. The endless nights of study. Prepare for another exam. Study this, prepare for another exam. Do this, prepare for another exam. It's crazy. Now, I'm looking at this as a 51-year-old, because I was very successful in 2 careers. This is not my first rodeo. I know how life really is. This is not the way it should be. This is not the way it has to be. but no one tells AMA or tells the medical association, board examiners, to fuck off. Because everyone's afraid. The school system is afraid because of their accreditation or their ranking. Students are afraid to say something because they're afraid that they'll be kicked out or not get a license. The ones that are already practicing are afraid to say stuff, and lose their license. Right now, there's been people, especially during the era of COVID, where they stepped up and, said things that were right to try to inform the public. And, they had threats of their licensing being pulled or were pulled. Maybe some of them have been reinstated, some of them probably not. I guess it depends on the situation and how far they wanted to push it. But, the reality of the situation here is that we have a failed system that is taking place for the society and for the student and for the profession, right? We're going to need more doctors. Why? Because we have a graying population. And, there's going to be other pathologies, post-COVID that are going to need to be cared for. Just look, I don't remember his name, but that New York doctor during the first wave that was, telling people, hey, he was, I believe, an ICU physician during the first wave in New York. And he was saying this, a lot of these cases aren't ARDS. They're non-ARDS. And they were treating it wrong. Not everyone is ARDS. And so, but, he was banned and my understanding was fired from the ICU. I don't remember his name. He was in blue scrubs when he was doing his videos. He didn't do too many of them, and he had kind of like longer, a little bit curly hair. Kind of looked like me in a way when I had longer hair. But he was stepping up to the plate and trying to do the right thing. Why? Because we say a Hippocratic oath, and a lot of us mean it when we say it. We mean it. We take it to heart. And that's what the profession expects. But yet, the reality is that if you do what the oath says to do, you could be ostracized. You could be kicked out. You could lose your license or whatever, right? So this is another issue. But I'll tell you, it's real. Stress in these schools. So, ones that came in a little late during the recording here, I was talking about how the younger children, right? The ones that are in private school, at different levels, right? And I see this from the New York area and the Connecticut, New Jersey area, right? The tri-state area. But you have individuals stressed out because they're afraid that they're not going to get into a good school, a top 40 school or an Ivy League. So, their parents invest a lot of money in private schooling or boarding schooling, right? But, there's a lot of stress. And if they don't get into the school that they want, they think they're going to be a failure and they commit suicide or, they get super depressed. And it's a major problem. It's a major problem. We need to let kids be kids, but also give them, some discipline. I think, many kids, especially in the public sector, in public school, are running wild. So we need discipline, right? But there is such a thing as over-disciplining the kid. There is such a thing as overachieving, right? Breaks these kids. Because they've been told that if you don't get into Harvard, you're a failure, right? Because Johnny, we spent $60,000 a year for your private education for the last 12 years. You get into Harvard, because, that's what grandpa did and father did, right? And Some of these kids, you know, they can do it, and a lot of them can't, you know? And they feel like they're a failure, and they decide, you know, to commit suicide. And there's a case recently, and I know someone that has a child that's in private schooling in New York, very prestigious. And, you know, one of the kids decided to commit suicide. You know, why? Because they didn't get into their school of choice, you know, during the early admissions. And that same problem is translated into medical school. When there's too much stress during rotation, too much stress during the licensing exams. So, you know, how does a student get through this? Does a student just become less human? Is that the only way to do it? I thought going into medicine, you know, after being an engineer for many years and being, you know, in finance in New York for many years, you know, I figured that I saw it all, right? And that the most human thing to do would be a doctor, you know, be a medical doctor, help people. It's the most inhumane thing you can do to yourself. It is absolutely nuts. But they don't tell you this. You gotta live it. You gotta be in it to really understand it, right? So that's a lot of bullshit going on, right? And then, you know, being myself and seeing, you know, what has been going on for the last 3 years, and having an aptitude to being able to explain and see where this was all going, and then seeing other MDs on the take and trying to profit from it fucking drives me up the fucking wall. Especially for these doctors where it was easier for them to be an MD. Because it's a lot harder to be an MD now than it was when Hotez, you know, became an MD. It's a lot harder now to be an MD than when Malone became an MD. But they're on the take. They profited from a disaster. Meanwhile, one of my classmates is getting buried because all of the evidence points to a suicide. There is a cost of what has been going on the last 3 years. At so many levels. And today, you know, I just thinking about my brother. You know, if he just was a little bit healthier, you know, he wouldn't have had the heart attack. You know, if I knew how bad he was, you know, maybe I could have intervened in some way. You know, it's always that shoulda, coulda, woulda. You know, hindsight's always 20/20. And that was the reason why I was so hell-bent in early 2020 to make things right to the best of my knowledge and to the best of my ability at the time. And I have never, ever sold out. And I'm pretty damn accurate on covering this. But there's a cost. You know, there's a professional cost. There's an emotional cost. There's that personal cost. And so the ones that are doctors and nurses, especially newly minted or being minted as we speak, they know exactly what the fuck I'm talking about. Then you got the rest of the population that, you know, it's like watching, you know, some sort of reality TV show. just don't think that, I just don't feel, and maybe I'm wrong, but I just don't feel that the average public really understands what doctors and nurses have to go through. You know, we have a classmate during first wave, all right, that was, before starting, she was a scribe, I think it was for 6 years or so, maybe more. And she was in the first wave, right, for COVID. Coding people. You know what that means? You know, dealing with people dying. You know, 9 of them a day. Can you imagine that? Going in and out, going into, you know, your night shift, right? And you're caring, you know, you're trying to care for patients. You're walking around with a physician that you're the scribe for, and you're seeing all this happening, and you know, room 25 codes, room 37 codes, right? And having to call because the family members couldn't be there during COVID, and having to deal with that 9 times a fucking day. But then you have, you know, people out there that saying this doesn't exist, that it's all a farce, it's all a pandemic. But this student has PTSD because of what she saw on a daily basis during the first wave. Yeah, we don't talk about that. That's the real cost. It's not just the 1 point whatever million that we've lost, which, by the way, one of them was my mother. But the physicians and the nurses and the pain they had to go through. Who's talking about that? Not many, but it's real. It's real. Maybe my channels are, you know, the realism of life, not sugar-coated, you know? So what does a student do? Because the system tells you, you know what? You got another test to prepare for. You got another hoop to go through. Because it's so noble to be a doctor. But when you need the system or you need the profession to protect you, they're nowhere to be found. You can't trust them because they're captured, they're compromised. You know, I mean, even something somewhat benign as like the CFA or the CPA, all this study prep type modules and systems that people buy and spend, you know, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, you know, to prep for, you know, and they obviously have MCAT ones and LSAT and, you know, step 1 through 3 and, right? They're $5,000 a pop, right? It's an industry now. But back when Malone was getting a degree for his MD, it wasn't that hard. And it's just like because so many people are trying to get into the profession and getting into certain residencies, you know, certain specialties, right? It's just they have to raise the bar more and more and more, and it breaks people. We are elastic as a species, right? Emotionally, but we have a breaking point, right? Our tensile strength is up to a certain point emotionally, you know, and certain people break it a little bit earlier than others, right? But within a band, a tolerance band, within a range, the human species can break. But we have a system that just doesn't care, and it just keeps on getting worse and worse and worse. And meanwhile, we'll see more and more medical students committing suicide. a real problem. Real problem. You know? And you can translate that into, you know, the non-physician world and the non-medical school world, you know? As life is becoming more and more stressful, people check out. It's a problem. You know, society doesn't want to do anything about it. Yeah. And I was talking to my classmates, right? Some of them knew this person that passed away, and, you know, much better than I did. But, you know, what was the common theme about everybody? It was like, yeah, it's a shame. He was such a nice person. I wish he was still around. You know, I'm so shocked that this happened. Okay, I got to go study now. It's so cold. It is so cold. Where you can accidentally or voluntarily check out, and not a goddamn person is going to give a shit. Yet, a physician has to go through all of this, and even nurses have to go through all of this stress to try to give healing to the best of their ability to patients. I mean, you know, you know, not to be dark about this, right? But what you really should do is do an experiment, right? Look in the mirror tonight, you know, after you listen. And, you know, and talk to yourself in the mirror, right? And you go in your bathroom or, you know, in your bedroom, look at this mirror, and you go, how many people are actually going to care if I die? How many people are going to actually care if I end up getting cancer? How many people are actually going to be there if you're, you know, if you really need someone there to take care of you? You know, and the reality of the situation is not many are going to be there. Not many, because life just keeps on freight training. Sad, sad. And it's because we haven't anchored ourselves to true principles, right? It's about money, it's about a bigger house, it's about a fancier car. You know, what was the big, you know, trending thing that was going on Twitter? How to monetize your channel, right? How do I accumulate more gold so I can build a golden calf? We're not anchored to principles. And when you lose that at an adult level, we translate that to children. They see that and they become detached. They're not anchored. And when they're not anchored and they think that, you know, it's okay to be a hedon, then you have cases like what we're seeing in New York, where there's lots of stabbings and lots of gunshots, people driving on mopeds and randomly shooting people on the street for no due cause, or just walking into a store and stealing items, thinking that's normal. You know, several decades ago, if that happened, the store owner would have pulled a gun and shot them. But not today, because we're detached. So it's a bigger issue. It's not just the stress of academia, stress of, you know, getting into a profession, you know, like a lawyer or an engineer or a doctor or whatever. But there's this anchoring. We've lost our anchor. Where is the anchor? Or Ted Kennedy would say, you know, true north. Your true north. What's the true north? You know, that's more for navigation, for sailing that he's talking about. But, you know, it's an analogy for life. You know, where's your true north? So when things get bad, when you hear a classmate killing themselves because the medical profession is fucked up, right? Then, you know, if you have a true north, you can kind of rebalance, you can readjust and get through it. But it was amazing. It was amazing. I know the student body that knew him, you know, at a personal level, you know, and studied with him as we were studying for our exams and stuff. Can't mourn too much. We gotta just, because the process is so just fast paced and just so test driven and performance based, and it's just, you can't. I mean, I couldn't really mourn my mother's death while we were in the, studying cardiology. I couldn't. It was either, mourn and, take a semester off, or just keep on pushing. Well, I picked the, keep on pushing. Maybe I'm cold. I don't know. It's not right. It's just not right. So, I covered a lot of topics today. Some things that are important for people to talk about. That, their children are getting stressed, and they're getting into depression because of it. They're getting suicidal because of it, because of this belief that you can't be successful unless you do this, this, and this. And that if you don't do those things, then you're not going to be successful, which is a total canard. But they believe it, and their parents believe it. And they put them through a process that is too stressful. The tuition keeps on going up with the private schools, and the stress just keeps on ramping up. The acceptance rates at the top 40, continue to go down because there's so many applicants. So you got to stand out. And these children, to get in, these children have to have a nonprofit that's successful, generating $500,000 to $3 million by the time that they're 13 years old. I mean, come on. Come on. Is that a healthy child? Fuck no. But we have a society that puts them on a pedestal when they do that. There's the problem. And then, it goes all the way up. It goes all the way up to, these higher levels of education, like an MD, right? And I guess, you can do well and, get in and do well, and then you're not doing so well in the rotations or whatever, and you're stressed because you may not get the residency that you're hoping for. There's this year's it's a pressure cooker. It's not healthy. It's definitely not healthy, especially if they're not anchored, if the student's not anchored. But that's my take on it. It's the cold side of medical school. It's the cold side of medical school. Please subscribe to all my channels. When you see a video, you can click the links in the description box. Subscribe to the 3 channels that I have on YouTube. I premiere all my work there. Some of it I leave up, but I premiere multiple times so you can see it. And then everything's archived on Rumble, Bitchute, and Brighteon, because a lot of the stuff I say I can't keep up on YouTube because of the censorship, the strikes and stuff. So please subscribe there. If you want to support my work, you can be a Patreon subscriber. Links in the description of each of the videos. Better yet, go to the store that I have. I have a website that's called the-reykjavik.com. That's the-reykjavik.com. And I have a lot of books that I've written, pre-dissertation stuff, coursework at Harvard type stuff. But better yet, it's the supplements, that I've been focused on this anti-aging protocol that I've been keep on telling people, to get through this crisis and to get healthy, In a slow down aging, you follow a 3-step process, and that process is neutralize pathogens with nanosilvers, reduce inflammation with like things like ashwagandha and turmeric, and then you take a very strong antioxidant like C60 or resveratrol. And by doing that on a regular basis, you slow down aging, you slow down the inflammatory process, and your body starts to heal. It's not a cure-all for, all ailments, but it's definitely something that, you do regularly, and you're going to start to see improvement. Then you can hang a bunch of stuff on those pillars, such as the vitamin C's and the B complexes and the multivitamins and the collagen and probiotics and stuff like that. You do this on a regular basis, you're going to stay healthy. I mean, I'm 51 years old, and I am very fit, and I am in a very competitive environment. Right? Most 50-year-olds could not do what I do. Even though I blow steam once in a while. But but the thing is that if you listen to me, the stuff that I have learned through, watching people die, right, early on in my life because of heart disease, and then, coupling that with what I've learned in medical school, if you listen to what I'm saying, there's a lot of benefit if you follow this anti-aging protocol. And it goes beyond just, slowing down the aging process. It's actually helping with healing the body and getting your body back into homeostasis. Again, it's not a cure for, for ailments and stuff, but you follow what I'm saying, you're going to do a lot better off, then it's better to invest in yourself, through supplements, better sleep, proper diet and exercise. Invest in yourself now than when you start to break down in your late 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. You're moving that timeline out, right? You're extending your life. You're extending not just life extension, it's the productivity of your life, the quality of the life is improved. But hopefully that helps with how you can improve your life. Maybe learn something philosophically in what I just said. So again, go to my store. It's the-studio-reykjavik.com and use the discount 5, it's all caps, discount 5, and that'll give you $5 off on any order. Thank you for listening. And by the way, I'm not like Malone. I don't sell out.